Milana, and I will be your moderator for the online session. I would like to welcome everyone and the keynote speaker and also our presenters for this conference. Yes, we're first going to start with the first online presentation, which will be Athanasius Charismos with the subject decoding morphologic. Can LLMs handle inflection and deviation in English and Greek?
Hi, everyone. So today we're going to see how we can, if it's possible, decode morphosyntax with the LLMs, especially using two different word formation processes, inflection and derivation in English and in Greek. So our today presentation is going to include a short introduction and also short literature review about computational morphology or morphosyntax and how we can jump from this area to large language models and assessment, the research methodology of our presentation, data analysis, discussion, and some concluding remarks. So first of all, why try to use AI in linguistic analysis? Basically speaking, it is in the area of generative AI, which is a sophisticated tool that creates, it's a decoder that creates a human-like text across diverse contexts. Also, we include the LLMs as part of the natural language process potential because during this kind of training process, a broad array of language-based tasks and technical analysis are included in the pre-trained data, which is crucial on its or their better performance. Also, the morphosyntactic parsing has a history of more than, 4 decades, and it started with stemming and breaking words into constituent morphemes and link the syntactic features. And since then, we evolve all this computational morphosyntactic area with different kind of parsers, both morphology and syntax. And also the data extraction, when you try to analyze grammatical information per morpheme units, it is one of the most challenging parts in computational linguistics the last 5 decades. Also, there is specific kind of challenges that we can identify in the combination between the LLMs and the morphological parsing. First of all, since the LLMs utilized the GPT technology for sophisticated sound and morphological analysis of 2023, we saw that it is quite capable at least to do some basic morphological activities, tasks. And both parsers and LLMs struggle with linguistic ambiguity and irregularities. We call it allomorphy. And the structural complexity that we can identify in several word formation processes, especially in compounding, agglutination, and identifying morpheme boundaries, it is something that we try to resolve the last years. And finally, one of the issues that we try to overcome but still remains a huge problem is the failure to deal with the OOV words, which means words that have never counted, are usually hapax legomena, and it is a critical issue if we try to compare it with high morphological variation, especially in fusional and agglutinative languages. Now, considering that we try to focus on a specific target, which is evaluating the LLM accuracy in analyzing inflectional morphosyntactic feature and derivational patterns, we try to compare two different typological languages, which is English, which is a contrastive analytic language, compared to Greek, which is a rich fusional language. Our research question, which is the short version here, we're going to see later in discussion. First of all, are the LLMs able to identify, categorize, and disambiguate features across divergent system? Second, how does the LLM performance on inflectional paradigms correlate with or affect its accuracy in processing derivational morphology? And the third, to what extent does the density of morphosyntactic feature encoding assist or constrain the model's ability to recognize derivational productivity? So our central hypothesis is that typological mismatch expose systematic gaps in processing inflectionally dense and derivational complex lexemes. Now, to skip the literature review, we start with the unsupervised morphology learning and syntax. The foundations started with rooted in language acquisition and psychology. The early precursors started at the middle of 70s and 80s when they tried to identify specific kind of patterns, both for morphology and the syntax. And one of the first tasks that we try to do in this interface is to identify the boundaries between the morphemes, usually between stem and suffixes. And later we introduce the n-grams, bigrams, usually trigrams, in the morpheme segmentation in our effort to resolve this kind of morpheme analysis. And finally, with Goldsmith gold standard approach, we use the minimum description length as a gold standard to resolve this kind of issues through unsupervised machine learning. On the other hand, since we thought that this didn't work quite well, especially for morphologically rich languages, we tried to use different kind of models, either rule-based, stochastic, or connectionist models. For most of the cases, we used some pedagogical or language acquisition theories, and we tried to adapt these kind of approaches into different kind of computational models. For example, in maximum entropy that we took from maths or memory-based, again, another psycholinguistic theory. The same also for transformation-based approach, which usually try to take into consideration the previous information. And lately, it is one of not so common research patterns that we can find with the LLMs. We try to use them in our linguistic analysis, but without any proper evaluation metrics. So if we check the last 3 years, how the LLMs perform with specific kind of linguistic tasks, we're going to see very few research studies, and usually they support the data that is quite successful in rich language, and also compared to the pure inflectional language, and depends usually on the semantic cue. And another thing that is quite important based on previous research is that the LLMs rely on massive training data patterns rather than explicit linguistic knowledge for morphological generation. Nevertheless, we're going to test this kind of theories with different kind of prompting. Now, based on our recent module, we tried to use an integrated approach. So the theoretical morphological analysis combined with computational model and empirical evaluation. We have constructed a corpus annotated and unannotated for Greek and English for this kind of research. We tag specific kind of phenomena because we needed then to retrain the system after the initial prompting. And for our model benchmark, we use 4 different LLMs: Claude 5.1, Gemini 3, GPT 5.1, Claude 4.7, and Perplexity 4.5. And for our model, we use different kind of valuation metrics. The standard was precision recall and F1 score. We also introduced some novel custom evaluation metric. As you can see, this is called the MIME LLM rubric. It is one of our forthcoming papers. And as you can see here, the structure is 3 different categories with 4 variation and reasoning and different weight for each of these categories, and we're going to see how we can use it in evaluation later. And the exploration of supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement learning by human feedback via advanced prompt engineering, as we're going to see with specific examples. So our data includes 250 Greek words for inflection and English for derivation and English, 250 Greek words for inflection and derivation, both for Greek and English, 50 derived words with ambiguity, 100 words and verbs with allomorphy, and 100 sentences to identify the word formation process, and some raw text data from standard English and Greek. For this reason, we use plenty of morphology coursebook that we can extract data from there and include it in our training data and test data, and also some data from the British National Corpus and Wikipedia. And why I decided to use the LLMs? First of all, because they have an automated pattern recognition. It has a cross-linguistic scalability, and of course, contextual depth. It is one of the strengths of the LLMs. And finally, because you try to test the robustness to regularity that can be handled with the LLMs. Now, for our task and evaluation, we use 5 different tasks. The first one has to do about the morphological analysis of inflected forms and lexemes and identification of these processes compared to the other word formation process, identify the morphemes and their ambiguity, not just the boundaries but also the ID, deal with allomorphy, make a morphosyntactic feature analysis both from specific kind of words and raw data, and finally give some morphological questions that we use for morphological exams in our courses. And I also provide you here with different cases of prompting. We used zero-shot prompting, few-shot prompting, and chain of thoughts prompting for our testing data. Now, based on our task, according to the first one, we saw that we have a high accuracy with inflection, borrowing, derivation, and compounding. Of course, the 3 major and most popular word formation processes plus the borrowing. The low accuracy goes for conversion, reduplication, clipping, eponymy, and back formation. And usually the most common errors, both for English and Greek, was allomorphy, the derived nouns with some phonological changes, and the clipped words and that was confused as blends, and eponymy that for the cases was considered as borrowing. Now, in the word formation process of the LLMs in the English language, we saw that back formation, reduplication, clipping, borrowing, and accuracy was almost perfect for recall. But for precision, which was most important, derivation was almost perfect. From what we saw, we think that the examples that was taken from websites that almost flawless. Or even if we disagree with the result, it is actually not mimics, copies the resource errors. And the examples from the books that have introduced that cannot be found electronically there included several errors. So definitely you are sure that some of our testing data were in the pre-trained dataset of all the LLMs. Now, on the other hand, when you try to do the analysis and the category identification, this shows strong capabilities in both morpheme segmentation and category identification. In English, it does show more balanced results across the morpheme identification compared to the Greek ones. And the model's classification is better than segment identification, but less reliable at performing segmentation itself. So several stems has problematic boundaries, and I give you some examples here. We just saw that the system was replicating the same issues that we identified in unsupervised morphology learnings 2 decades ago. Also, another problematic category that we usually, most of the morphologists try to not deal or to ignore are the Greek past participles, because they include both reduplication and an inactive phonological rule, which is the Grassmann law. And it was really problematic in this analysis. Or in the third task, we try to deal with allomorphy. Allomorphy is something that has to do about unexpected and unpredictable changes of the stem, or usually with the morphemes. All of them, the score generally speaking was not satisfying. We have several issues both in the stem allomorphic analysis and in the morpheme allomorphic analysis. The only LLM that was provided with an amazing performance is Grok. Grok wasn't in our initial testing. I just tested for another reason, and to be honest, I was impressed about the Greek analysis. But when I was asking about the source, the system was returning some of my papers, and maybe that was the reason that the system was copying some of my data from this paper or trying to mimic my analysis. Now for the fourth feature for a task about identifying the morphosyntactic features, it was almost flawless task, especially in English. It is a poor morphological language. However, the system always identifying the feature for its and its value, of course, for its inflectional suffix. The same also for the derivational suffixes. It was only some issues based on the suffix boundaries. Also, when it tried to see how the system was analyzing these morphosyntactic features, it was impressive that the system included zero morphemes in these cases. So it was adding a zero morpheme that was actually providing morphological features. And we saw no prompting deviation in this kind of analysis. So both the zero shot, the few shot, and the chain of thought has exactly the same, almost exactly the same performance. And finally, in our tasks, we try to give one of the exam papers that we use with our students. The system managed quite highly for the multiple choice questions. To justify an argument in a short answer, it include many inconsistencies and several artificial examples that didn't make sense. In the true-false group, it has a mediocre performance with several errors because the negation items were present and make a huge difference in their performance. And in open-ended questions, they have a decent performance for theoretical issues, but some issues for data comparison and analysis were included. Now, using our MIME LLM metric system, as you can see, the dimensional score represents that Claude was much better compared to the other LLMs. And if you see the heat map down to the right, you can see that the green areas are the really high performances of the system in specific kind of tasks, and the red areas was the quite, or the orange ones, the quite problematic areas of the morphological analysis. Now, to return to our research questions, in the first one, we saw that feature by feature accuracy across the 8 categories, across the 8 inflectional features was benchmarked very high with precision recall and F1, plus the morphosyntactic context sensitivity metric as we saw in our rubric. Also, the typological asymmetry as a predictor of an error train shows that the English errors clusters around categories encoded syntactically rather than morphologically. And compared to the Greek ones, where the Greek errors cluster in the fusional layers that bundle multiple features into a single cumulative exponent, since one morpheme can contain at least 3 values of 3 different categories. And of course, the syncretism as a diachronic bottleneck so that the performance, as expected, collapsed precisely where a single surface form carries multiple features bundles, like in Greek can be nominative plural or accusative plural, and also the gender included, or the English plus s can be in some of the cases confusing between plural, third singular in past in present simple, or the possessive version of the noun. Now, based on the second research question about the inflectional paradigm, if it is intact compared to the derivational morphological analysis, we saw that the boundary confusion between inflection and derivation as a center empirical probe presented that the system can actually identify these kind of processes with only few cases of specific kind of derivational suffixes like the air as adjunctive derivational suffix or tis vs is in the Greek kind of case. Also, productivity and base suffix bracketing evaluated with our metric system, it's so that the LLMs can apply rule government operation, or lean on surface analogical pattern from training distribution, we saw that both of them can be capable, depends on our case. So we use for both of these approaches few-shot prompting with exactly the same results if we try to analyze some complex lexemes like ungovernability, denationalization, ακαταλαβίστικος, or απεθνικοποίηση, etc. And for the third research question, we saw that complexity was a quantitative predictor. So regressing per item accuracy on our metric system so that usually syncretism, allomorphy, suppletion, and morphosemantic ambiguity identify that this kind of case is the problematic, mostly allomorphy and ambiguity. Also, the language asymmetry in the degradation curve verified the hypothesis that Greek accuracy declines more steeply than English as complexity rises, with the steepest load on items where opacity compounds or covers the area across inflection and derivation simultaneously. For example, the adjectives or the degrees of the adjectives or the participle. And we also saw that in advanced prompting on morphological annotated data, we compare before and after comparison on specific kind of test sets, and we try to quantify that whether the observed gaps are architectural or trainable. We saw that it was trainable, since with the prompting we solved some of this issue, and whether prompt engineer reinforcement learning by human feedback transfer across related future classes or remains narrowly in task specific. Unfortunately, it saw that it was task related, this kind of prompting relation. So to conclude, the overall performance shows that the LLMs demonstrates quite high level of competence in morphological analysis tasks for both Greek and English. We saw that from zero thoughts to a chain of thought prompting, the system proved to be a valuable alternative to traditional methods, and they can perform well without being explicitly trained on specific tasks due to very carefully prompting. And the gaps in morphosyntactic competence, despite the fluent task level output, we saw that the LLM systematically underperformed on rule governed operation. Okay, so the mean was very close to 0.22, which was quite low for all the four modules, and the performance reflects analogical pattern matching over training data rather than linguistically informed analysis. And our metrics show that the reasoning and the variation gap quantifies what surface fluency benchmark means. And that's the reason that we try to evaluate frameworks for morphological complex languages need to foreground paradigms productivity, allomorphic flexibility, and opaque form handling, which is one of the key issues in this problematic computational analysis. And for this reason, we hope that our system, our metric system, is going to show that the implication in rich languages still remains an issue, not just because the tools that was built for low morphology English, they transfer this kind of transparently to the Greek or to any other morphological Greek languages. We have to fine-tune our systems because based on the preliminary prompt engineering signals, this kind of performance suggests that the part of the gap is trainable, and this is really optimistic and a good scenario. And we hope that our metric can be tested in other languages to see how form variation and reasoning can be weighted and recombined in our final form of evaluation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, it seems like we do not have any questions. Thank you once again for your presentation.
Thank you, you're welcome.
Pleasure's all mine. We are going to move over to our next online presenter, Bageshri Bagashwa, that will be presenting indexicality and in regressment in X Dynascore on Dalgona coffee.
Hello everyone, I'm Bhageshri Bhageshwar from India. Today I'm here to present my paper, Indexicality and Enregisterment in X Discourse on Dalgona Coffee. So in my study, I'm going to look at how a simple online trend, which came to rise during COVID-19 lockdown, that is Dalgona coffee, how it became more than just a drink after its repetition and circulation over different platforms. Specifically, I'm going to look at the platform X, formerly Twitter. I'm going to look at it through following questions. The first question is, what recurring linguistic and thematic patterns characterize discourse about Dalgona coffee on X during the lockdown period? The second is, what indexical meanings emerge from these patterns in relation to pandemic time, participation, productivity, and platform culture? And the third question is, how do repeated discursive practices contribute to the enregisterment of Dalgona coffee as a recognizable marker of lockdown experience in digitally mediated environments? For this paper, I'm basically looking at four theoretical concepts. The first one is indexicality, which is developed by Silverstein and Agha, according to which certain linguistic forms point to social meanings in certain contexts, and these meanings often emerge through repeated use. The second concept is enregisterment. So it is basically the next step after indexicality, where the meanings which are emerged after indexicality become stabilized and they become recognizable social forms in the context. So that is enregisterment. The third concept is distinction by Bourdieu. So it means the how everyday practices signal taste and social position, and how food also acts as a marker of identity and cultural capital. The fourth concept is mediatization by Couldry and Hep, according to which meaning emerges through digital infrastructures, through circulation, visibility, and interpretation. For this, I have reviewed a lot of studies in different fields related to the topic. So the first is social linguistics. So here the studies show how language constructs social meaning, especially with the help of indexicality and enregisterment. Under enregisterment studies, I saw a particular focus on dialects and speech styles. Then in food and identity research, I saw mainly the finding that food practices signal class, culture, lifestyle. Under digital media studies, I saw how platforms enable visibility, participation, and trend circulation. And then in viral culture research by Schiffman, I saw how trends spread through imitation and adaptation. So through this literature review, I came to understand the research gap, that there has been work in each field separately, but there is very limited work which links all the concepts together, like language, food practices, and digital platforms. And there are also very few studies on how everyday trends become social symbols online. So that's why the present study addresses how Dalgona coffee, which was one of the main trends during lockdown, became a recognizable sign of that lockdown later on. So in my methodology, as I already mentioned, I'm going to look at the platform X, and I have looked at posts from March to May 2020, which was the period of early lockdown in major part of the world. And I have collected total 126 posts using the keywords Dalgona and lockdown. And I have focused mostly on English language posts, which are in text format, and I have avoided images and videos in this study. This is my coding procedure and data analysis method. So first of all, I numbered the data set. So there were total 126 posts. I did the thematic analysis, and then I tagged the tweets accordingly with the help of software called Tagit. I tagged the data on two levels. So the first level was of descriptive codes, where I coded the tweets according to the surface features which came across. For example, like lockdown, or if any platform is mentioned or any trend is mentioned directly. So those surface features are called descriptive codes in the study. And then on level 2, I talk about indexical codes. So that means the social meanings which are conveyed through those descriptive codes. So like humor, participation, or productivity. These are the two tables of level 1 coding and level 2 coding. These are not the complete tables. Due to the space limitation, I have only included 3 examples here. So for example, in table 1, descriptive code temp lockdown. So this is one of the codes. It means TEMP means temporal aspect of lockdown. And its explanation is explicit lexical reference to lockdown, quarantine, or COVID restrictions. So when this surface feature appears, the code is given temp lockdown. N denotes the number of tweets, which shows that temporal aspect, and percentage is the frequency of those tweets. Similarly, in level 2 coding, I talk about indexical function codes. So for example, the first entry, IDX and register meant. So here IDX means indexical, and its meaning is how the post constructs Dalgona as a recognizable sign of lockdown culture. So how that meaning is n-registered. So that's how I have prepared the codes. There are around in total 40 codes. So all these 40 codes, which are called micro codes, they are now grouped together under 5 macro themes. So they are grouped according to their similarities. So if few codes, if they're talking about the temporal aspect of the tweet, then they are grouped under crisis temporality. For example, this is one of the macro themes. Similarly, we have 4 other macro themes which emerge through micro codes. So the second theme is participatory norms. Third is productivity expectations. Fourth is platform mediated visibility. And the fifth is reflexive trend awareness. So now I'll share my results. So these results are categorized according to the 5 macro themes. The first theme is Dalgona coffee as a crisis temporal index. So this is in center is a screenshot of a tweet. So this is the tweet, day 4 of lockdown, still no milk to make Dalgona coffee. So here there is a clear reference to day 4, that means the temporal aspect of lockdown. So in that way, many of the posts, they refer to such temporal aspects like lockdown 1.0, day 4, or month 1. So somewhere this helps structure blurred repetitive lockdown experience, and it gives a sense of phases which were there in quarantine. Also, we can see an indexical shift here. So, for example, in the first order or in the first appearance of it, Dalgona coffee was just a drink. But in its second order, now as it is pointing towards lockdown, it becomes early lockdown symbol. So that's how there is an indexical shift from first order to second order. In some of the tweets, it is also referred to as feels like a lifetime ago. So this is a kind of retrospective framing. So it is seen as tied to a specific moment. Results. So second theme is participatory normativity and enregisterment. So here we go on from indexicality to enregisterment. So I'll read the example tweet here. Are you even a part of the 2020 Corona lockdown if you haven't made Dalgona coffee yet? So we can see there is a kind of participation expectation from the users. So this some of the posts even suggest that making Dalgona means you're doing lockdown properly. And if you're not doing it, this is outside the norm. So this shows how that typical symbol got registered in the context through repetition, humor, irony, or peer comparison. So here in registerment process takes place when this individual act of making Dalgona coffee becomes a shared social script, and Dalgona becomes a shorthand for lockdown behavior. The third theme is platform circulation and mediatized visibility. So here we see there are frequent references to Instagram, TikTok, and X, and Dalgona framed as something that spreads through repetition and algorithmic visibility. As we can see in this example, everyone on my Instagram making the Dalgona coffee today. So this shows how the timeline saturation takes place and there is repetitive content regarding Dalgona coffee. The fourth theme is competitive domesticity and symbolic distinction. So here we can see the body's concept of distinction, how it is at work here. So I'll read the example first. So everyone else flourishing in lockdown. Dalgona coffee, banana bread, homemade pizza, scones, homemade sushi. Me, oh, look at us, having 2-minute noodles for the 73957 consecutive meal. So here we see a clear distinction between everyone else and me. In everyone else, an elaborate list of elaborate recipes, some fancy recipes is there. And in me, having 2-minute noodles, something which is bare minimum for survival, is shown. So this distinction shows social positioning of the two sides. And that's why we can see lockdown was framed as a productivity contest in many of the tweets in this way. The last theme is reflexive life cycle consciousness and indexical transformation. So towards the end, users show awareness of trend life cycle. They started seeing Dalgona coffee not just as a meme object, but they also started tracking its cycle. So from rise to peak to decline. Some posts even indicate that they have moved on from Dalgona. Some even tried to expect the new variations like Dalgona whiskey. So there has been a shift in meaning from novel to overused to later on cliche. So we can see an indexical transformation here from participation marker to object of commentary. So the final results are, we can see indexical orders shift. So first order was a whipped coffee drink. In second order, Dalgona coffee becomes a recognizable sign of early lockdown participation. And in the third order, it becomes a reflexively acknowledged meme, subject to parody and life cycle commentary. So as we saw, this everyday practice of Dalgona coffee, it became a socially meaningful symbol through digital circulation. This somewhere extends social linguistics from meaning making beyond language to everyday practices online. As we saw, indexicality of Dalgona, so it became marker of early lockdown experience and it links to time, boredom, and online sociality in the pandemic context. Enregisterment happens through repetition and humor. So it becomes a part of a shared behavioral script. Then distinction signals productivity, taste, lifestyle. It reveals aspirational tensions as well. And mediatization platforms shape visibility and participation. So they show how meaning depends on sharing and circulation on digital platforms. Finally, the conclusion is here. So Dalgona coffee, the simple recipe became lockdown symbol. And it shows how meaning was shaped through repetition, humor, platform circulation. The value lies less in the drink itself and more in its circulation and digital presence. Users show awareness of trend rise, saturation, and decline. Future directions. So a cross-platform comparison can be done. Also, a multilingual and multimodal data can be explored in the similar manner. Other viral trends across contexts can also be studied. So final takeaway from this study is that digital platforms turn everyday practices into shared social meanings, especially in times of crisis. This is the list of my references I used for this study. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to ask, do you have any questions?
If I may, I have a question, or rather perhaps a comment that I think would help to strengthen your research for the future. You presented us a type of thematic coding, right? And perhaps using a second coder and then doing a reliability Kippendorf alpha to check whether there is agreement between the two coders could actually strengthen your research. Because frankly speaking, in some of the examples that you were showing, I might disagree with certain interpretations. And thus, if you define your core terms and your core like clusters. And then if you have a second coder and there is an intercoder reliability and intercoder agreement, I think it would just strengthen your argument and would give more value to your research. Otherwise, thank you. It was very interesting. I haven't tried Dalgona coffee, but is this instant coffee or ground coffee?
It is instant.
It is
Like
instant.
there is a procedure. It is basically a whipped coffee itself, but it got
Oh,
somehow hyped during COVID. And ma'am, thank you so much for your suggestion. I'll definitely work on it. I'll definitely give it to another coder, and then I'm sure reliability will increase and it will strengthen my study. Thank you so much for that comment. It means a lot.
thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just quickly go to our program. Our next presentation is number 3, Svetlana Shurma with a cultural linguistic approach to cultural symbols. You may present. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for surviving till Friday and attending this last session that is happening today. I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to present my short talk on the role of cultural symbols within cultural linguistic framework. Next slide, please. My presentation is in 5 parts. I will start with a short overview of cultural linguistics, talk slightly about cultural metaphors, symbols, and present 2 case studies, which are byproducts of 2 of my most recent publications. Next slide, please. Could you please click again?
Oh, okay.
And again until the end of the slide. Yeah. Thank you. So cultural linguistics is a term coined and popularized by Professor Sharifian, who defined it as a linguistic discipline that studies cultural conceptualizations that shape how human languages are used. Thus, a language becomes the most important object of analysis within cultural linguistics, since it is interpreted as a memory bank through which specific cultural conceptualizations exist and can be analyzed within specific linguistic communities. Cultural linguistics is a theoretical and analytical framework, and its main idea is that cultural cognition is a form of both inactive cognition and distributed cognition. At the same time, cultural cognition is dynamic and could change over time. Next slide, please. Next. The analytical tools of cultural linguistics are cultural schemas, cultural categories, and cultural metaphors. Professor Schroeder adds also cultural prototypes and cultural metonymies as analytical tools of cultural linguistics. I would like to focus on cultural metaphors, or conventional and culturally significant cross-domain mappings that can be used to analyze specific lingua cultures. Next slide, please. Cultural metaphors are culture-specific conceptualizations with roots in cultural traditions. They help to frame abstract concepts and simultaneously mediate specific values and worldviews. Professor Sharifian spoke about different cultural metaphors that exist within cultural processing continuum. Thus, he distinguished between worldview metaphors, such as nation is a body, that can be found in different European languages with their culture-specific versions. And on the other side of the spectrum are individual creative mappings, which appear in our everyday speech. However, these are easily understood by the members of the linguistic community. At the same time, cultural metaphors can be used as to profile nations, clusters of nations, and ethnicities. Professor Muzolf offers to look at cross-domain mappings through metaphor scenarios. Metaphor scenarios are understood as narrative, argumentative, and evaluative patterns of use and interpretation of metaphors. End of quote. These are complex and dynamic frames which enclose or incorporate specific social constructs, have default narrative structure, specific stereotypical characters, and in analyzing conspiracy theories, Professor Muzolf looks at metaphor scenarios through stereotypical action, sequence of events or outcomes that they could incorporate and eventually incite in real life. Next slide, please. A new development in cultural linguistics is incorporation of multimodal cultural metaphors into the interpretation of cultural conceptualizations. Professor Forceful offers the definition of multimodal metaphors. He claims that in order to interpret a metaphor as multimodal, the source domain and the target domain of a conceptual metaphor should exist in two modes, usually verbal and visual. Metaphor scenario framework can also be used to analyze multimodal cultural metaphors, since scenarios are grounded in shared cultural conceptualizations and collective memories of a specific linguistic culture. Next slide, please. I argued that cultural symbol could also be incorporated into the analytical tools of cultural linguistics. Cultural symbols have ritual significance or cultural meaning, which is attributed to artifacts, behaviors, and beliefs. Cultural symbols are different from referential symbols, as postulated by Charles Peirce. Referential symbols are symbolic systems such as the language itself. Cultural symbols have consistent social significance and are usually acquired in the process of learning within a specific linguocultural community. Language itself mediates cultural symbols because people in two different schemes of living can derive very different universal experiences from an identical event. For example, symbol red used in Indian culture versus symbol red used in Ukrainian culture is different. In Indian culture, red could signify purity, which is not the case of the Ukrainian culture. Next slide, please. I thus define cultural symbol as a cognitively mediated sign whose meaning emerges from shared interpretative processes within a cultural group, while its relevance is established through participation in a collective semantic network of relationships, conventions, and emotionally weighted associations rather than through the intrinsic physical properties. I also claim that cultural symbols primarily manifest themselves multimodally. Next slide, please. Let me offer two case studies of two different cultural symbols. I look at these cultural symbols through the interpretation within Ukrainian linguoculture. The first one is a cultural symbol of cross, which is now symbolically associated with Izum tragedy. With the start of the Russo-Ukrainian War, Izum was occupied by the Russian army. It was liberated in September 2022. And after the liberation, mass burial in the forest near Izum was found with more than 450 bodies buried there. Next slide, please. I looked at 16 articles which appeared across the world to report on this tragedy. The articles selected came from Ukraine, Russia, UK, France, Germany, US, Canada, India, UAE, and Qatar. The languages of the articles were Ukrainian, Russian, and English. On the one hand, the material that was selected was ideologically homogeneous because apart from India, all the other countries supported Ukraine and were pro-Western and pro-Ukrainian, especially when it came to voting in the UN in support or against Russian aggression against Ukraine. Next slide, please. A striking visual feature in the majority of these articles were the photographs of crosses that appeared added to the articles reporting about mass burial. Their cross was captured as a symbol of eternal life and resurrection, typical for Ukrainian rites of passage, funerals, but also in Christian beliefs. Interestingly, crosses were foregrounded or backgrounded in 22 photos added to 16 articles. At the same time, another interesting feature was that captions didn't include reference to cross. So the word cross or crosses appeared only 5 times in captions. One of the reasons for this is because cross is a cultural sign or a cultural symbol that does not require linguistic interpretation. It also contributes to visual symbolism that is aimed to carry most of the representational weight. It stands for the death, and it stands for those people who are perished and buried underneath the cross. On the other hand, cross participates in a discourse strategy of visual euphemization. Interestingly, mass media, especially Western mass media, is reluctant to display death, especially if death is not a good death. Next slide, please. So if we look at the scenario that is connected with the symbolism of cross, we notice that it functions as a social construct. It refers or alludes to Christianity and Christian beliefs, but also participates in death rituals related to burials in Ukrainian culture. At the same time, it is part of a default narrative structure, especially of good death, where death should be good and nice and not violent. The characters involved in this scenario are perished, which acquire agency in discourse, but also the living, who could act on behalf of the perished. Thus, the stereotypical action or the outcome is defined by the framing in the mass media discourse, where the articles give agency to the dead and the audience or the spectators required to participate in donations, help or support of Ukraine. Next slide, please. My second case study concerns the representation, cultural representation, and an artifact of motherland. In the Ukrainian languages, 3 different words can be used as near synonyms to refer to homeland. 2 of them are derived from the root meaning father, and 1 is derived from the root meaning mother. Interestingly, the one derived from the root meaning mother is not used as often as the other 2. At the same time, in the Ukrainian language, a metaphor, Nenka Ukraina, or Mother Ukraine, exists. It is based on the conceptual or cultural metaphor, land as a living being, or more precisely, land as close kin. At the same time, in the Ukrainian culture, its visual representation as a statue of Batkivshchinati, motherland, which was erected in 1981 in Kiev, exists. Next slide, please. I looked at how the statue as an artifact with the symbolic meaning and a lot of cultural feelings in the context of war is recontextualized in travel discourse. I looked at a specific Instagram account, Beautiful UA, that allowed posts from any user wishing to share their photography related to travel around Ukraine possible. What was visible is that in 2025, 72 posts featured the statue of Batkivshchina Mati as part of Kiev cityscape, as you could see in the screenshot to your right. 72 posts simply included the statue in the etnoscape or in the cityscape of Kiev, and thus it was seen or interpreted as a symbol of Kiev. 22 posts in 2025 included the statue in the associations with the historical events, poetic interpretation, or as the monument, a symbol of Ukraine as such. Next slide, please. At the same time, the statue itself participated in a discourse strategy of playful patriotism. Chen et al. Defined playful patriotism as state-endorsed, but not necessarily orchestrated, light-hearted, or amusing media content that promotes the established state ideology. Thus, the statue itself was recontextualized in patriotic discourse, where patriotism was viewed as a specific form of solidarity with the community, which became especially visible and noticeable in the context of war. Next slide, please. Thus, Batkivshchina Mati, or motherland, as a scenario included a specific social construct based on a cultural metaphor where land is interpreted as mother. The part of the default narrative structure included the image of mother who protects, but at the same time needs protection. The characters involved in the scenario are motherland, or personified land, symbolized or visually represented as a statue, but also patriots who either seek protection or are there to protect their mother. As you could see, once again, the framing in the discourse defines how this cultural symbol participates in two distinct discursive practices, that of patriotism and that of traveling. Next slide, please. Thus, cultural symbols could be viewed, as I have argued earlier, as analytical tools within cultural linguistics. We could see how they invoke shared knowledge, frame a specific topic or agenda, especially in the war-related discourse, reflect in-group identity when they participate in recontextualization in online discourses, encode cultural conceptualizations, and are embedded in culture and enacted in discourse and practice. Next slide, please. These are the references. And next slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next online presentation, number 5, Gloria Karakapa and Kestrins Nigrali with new insights on motion event encoding in Chinese.
Yes. Thank you
Just
so
a moment.
much. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here and have this opportunity to give this speech when, sorry, just a moment. Okay, let's start. So, the study examines the encoding of motion events in Chinese according to Tolmy's lexical typological framework or lexicalization patterns. In this perspective, path is considered the central semantic component on the basis of which languages are classified as either verb-framed, where path of motion is encoded in the verb, for example, in Spanish, el perro entró a la cueva, or satellite-framed languages where path is expressed outside the verb. For example, in English, the dog ran into the cave. Through the analysis of native speaker productions, the aim of the study is to explore the issue of how Chinese encodes motion events and to deeply understand whether it predominantly follows a verb-framed or a satellite-framed pattern, or rather exhibits alternative or mixed strategies. In particular, we are going to present only some preliminary results of the analysis of a selected data sample belonging to a larger corpus of a study that is still in progress. A motion event refers to the movement of an entity through space in relation to another reference point. According to Talmud's theory, a complex motion event is composed of four basic elements that are figure, which is the entity that moves, ground, which is the static reference point, path, which is the relative path, and motion, which is the movement itself, to which manner is added. That is the manner of motion. Based on the idea that path is a central element in motion events, since it represents the connection between figure and ground, Talmy has developed the theory of framing types, where path is considered as the main criterion for classifying languages. According to this model, languages are divided into two types, verb-framed or V-framed and satellite-framed or S-framed languages. In V-framed languages, the path is directly encoded in the verb together with motion, while manner, if any, is typically expressed outside the verb. For example, in Spanish, el perro entró a la cueva corriendo, the verb enter conveys the idea of going in through its route, while the manner of motion is conveyed by the external gerund corriendo. In satellite frame languages, the path is expressed by an external element called satellite, while the verb encodes motion and manner. For example, in English, the dog ran into the cave. The main verb ran conveys the idea of going running, while the particle into conveys the path followed by the figure. For instance, Roman and Semitic languages are usually reframed, while Germanic, Slavic, and Native American languages are typically S-framed. Actually, Talmud's dichotomy seems not to fully account for all languages, such as Chinese, which can encode path and manner in a more balanced way, leading some scholars, such as Schrobin, to propose the equivalently framed type, where path and manner are expressed in equivalent grammatical forms. For example, two verb forms in a so-called complex predicate construction. As far as motion event encoding is concerned, Chinese classification is still a matter of debate. Talmy considered Chinese a satellite frame language, arguing that motion and manner are encoded in the main verb, while path is expressed through additional elements functioning as satellites, as in constructions such as pei guo, flying across. In contrast, Thai classifies Chinese as a verb-framed language on the basis that path is encoded in a verb that can independently function as the main predicate. A different view is indeed offered by Schrobin, who proposes that Chinese should be treated as an equivalently framed language, since motion events are often expressed through constructions with coordinated and structurally equivalent elements, where manner and path are encoded by independent but equally important verbs, as in pouting, run, enter. Furthermore, Lean follows the motion morpheme hierarchy theory, a model based on scalar structure and semantic specificity. According to this classification, but by the native, but the relative degree of scalar information encoded by each morpheme. Sorry. According to this approach, the ordering of motion morpheme is not determined by binary typological classification, but by the relative degree of scalar information encoded by each morpheme. More recently, Romagnoli identifies 6 main patterns for the encoding of motion events in Chinese, as you can see in Table 1. Therefore, in some cases, a single verb expresses both motion and path, while in others, this verb is accompanied by a deictic element indicating movement toward or away from the speaker. Other patterns involve verbs encoding motion and manner, or combinations of multiple verbs that separately express manner and path, sometimes also accompanied by deictic element. In the present study, Tai's theory is adopted as a starting point, according to which Chinese is primarily a verb-framed language, although it shows a significant structural variability in the expression of motion, as we will show by comparing our data to the results of Romagnoli's study. The present study is based on an analysis conducted on the oral productions of 5 Chinese native speakers. The participants shared similar sociolinguistic characteristics. All were native speakers of Chinese, aged between 22 and 28, and had a high level of education, having completed a 4-year university degree each. To elicit the data, 8 short video clips were selected from an episode of a Mickey Mouse cartoon and used as visual stimuli to prompt participants' motion event descriptions. After watching a video, participants were individually asked to open question, what is happening, in order to avoid influencing their answers. The clips depict Mickey Mouse and his friends engaged in various actions. In the first video, the characters enter a house. In the second, they go upstairs. In the third, a character comes out of a barrel. In the fourth, a character climbs a mountain. In the fifth, the character falls from a mountain. In the sixth, the characters get into a car. In the seventh, a character falls off a roof, rolling down. And in the eighth and final video, the characters go down a hill hopping. The analysis of the listed 40 sentences show a clear tendency. As shown in Table 2, the most frequent pattern is the V-frame type, accounting for 31 occurrences, where path is encoded directly in the verb together with motion. Only 2 cases show S-framed constructions, in which manner is encoded in the main verb and path is expressed in satellite. In some occurrences, the path component is not explicitly expressed, and manner-only verbs are used, making these cases harder to clearly classify within the typology. Overall, these results indicate a strong tendency toward the V-framed encoding pattern, and thus a high degree of consistency in the description of motion events in Chinese. At the same time, the presence of less frequent alternative patterns suggests a limited degree of syntactic variation, including occasional S-framed and manner-only strategies. Okay.
Focusing on the analysis of motion event encoding patterns in Chinese, the results show that speakers display a high degree of structural flexibility in encoding motion, path, and manner. As already mentioned, the data of the present study were compared with the motion event encoding patterns identified by Romagnoli. As will be shown below in the example from 1 to 6, all the patterns identified by Romagnoli turn out to be attested in the present dataset, except for the pattern number 5 as shown in table number 3. Speakers predominantly employ pattern number 1, accounting for 27.5% of the data, where motion events are expressed through a single verb encoding both motion and path, as we can see in example number 1, 他们在上楼, that means they are going upstairs. This is followed by pattern number 4, which represents the 20% of the occurrences and involves a combination of verb of motion and manner and a verb of motion and path. As we can see in the example, 他们蹦蹦跳跳地离开, that means they left jumping. Pattern number 3, which accounts for 70.5% of the data, involves the use of a single verb encoding motion together with manner. As we can see in the example, 他在爬山, that means he is climbing the mountain. Moving on, pattern number 6, which includes all the components, verb of motion and manner, plus a verb of motion and path and analytic, was attested in 3 cases, corresponding to 7.5% of the data. As we can see in the example, 一只鸭子从洞里跳了出来, that means a duck jumped out of the barrel. Pattern number 2, where a motion and path verb is followed by the eitic element, was observed only once, representing 2.5% out of the data. As we can see in the example, 她从洞里面出来, that means she comes out of a barrel. In the end, as we can see, pattern number 5 was not attested. In addition, the analysis showed that 10 production do not fit into Romagnoli's 6 established patterns, corresponding to 3 additional patterns instead, as we can see in table number 4. As far as additional identified patterns are concerned, pattern number 7 is attested in 5 occurrences, corresponding to 12.55% of the data. Pattern number 8 is attested in 3 cases, accounting for 7.5% of the data, while pattern number 9 is attested in 2 occurrences, representing the 5% of the total. In particular, in pattern number 7 and in pattern number 8, the verb fall is followed by the verb descend, which belongs to the class of open-scale motion morphemes, and introduce a scalar structure to the motion, specifying a downward direction along a vertical axis. As we can see in the example of the pattern number 7, 有一只鸭子从屋顶上掉下来了, that means there is a duck that fell down from the roof. And pattern number 8, 大帅下山, that means he falls down the mountain. In the example of pattern number 9, the manner verb walk is preceded by a prepositional element combined with a locative component, that is the sequence 向前, that means forward, and introduce the path component specifying the direction of a movement along a frontal axis. As we can see in the example, there is a preposition and a locative marker plus a verb of motion and manner. The example is 动画角色高兴地向前走, that means the cartoon characters happily walk forward. Overall, the results concerning additional patterns still contribute to show the variability observed in Chinese motion event encoding, further highlighting the presence of non-typical constructions alongside the main typological patterns. To conclude, this study has investigated encoding of motion events in Chinese through the framework of time lexical typology. Although limited statistically, the preliminary results of the analysis of this first data can show some tendency. it emerges a predominance of verb frame constructions in which path is directly encoded in the verb, accounting for the majority of the data, as frame constructions and manual-only strategies are significantly less frequent in the present dataset. Moreover, the analysis also reveals a considerable degree of structural variability. Alongside the main typological patterns identified in previous literature, such as Romagnoli's pattern, speakers employ a range of alternative constructions, including complex serial verb and additional patterns going behind those captured by Romagnoli. These additional patterns show further different ways of distributing motion, manner, and path, and eitic information, often through sequence of verbs or prepositional elements that jointly contribute to the event structure. Overall, despite the statistical limit of the present case study, the findings suggest that Chinese is characterized by both a strong structural tendency and a significant degree of internal variation that define needs for further investigation. Here are some references about our work, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to ask, do we have any questions? Okay, seems like we don't have any questions. Thank you once again. And we will move on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Diane Banneker with the interplay of L1 and L2 reading proficiency in executive functions on metacognition in reading. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present my work. I'm Diane Banneker from Brazil. I'm going to tell about part of my thesis that is called the interplay of L1 and L2 reading proficiency and executive functions on metacognition in reading. Next slide, please. So this work is based in three main theoretical assumptions. That is metacognition. That is a term labeled by Flavel, an American psychologist, that he named this phenomenon as cognition about cognition, so consciousness on your cognition. Reading proficiency is the second main theoretical construct, and we can see that good readers normally show meta-comprehension and also metacognitive strategy. And the third main theoretical concept is bilingualism. We can see that bilingual readers normally show more frequent use of strategies and also conscious strategies. And normally they have more enhanced executive functions. Next slide, please. So here we're going to investigate three main executive functions that are inhibition, that includes self-control and control of interference, working memory, that includes conservation and handling of information in mind, and cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to change perspective according to Diamond. So these executive functions have occur in language acquisition and also so in reading. That is what we are investigating. Next slide, please. So yeah, it can be till the end. So our research question can be represented by a scale in which we want to investigate which factor have the more impact in metacognitive awareness of reading strategies and metacognitive strategy used in L1 reading. So if it's reading proficiency in L1 or L2, or if it's executive functions performed. Next slide, please. So our main hypothesis is that we believe that higher reading proficiency in L1 and L2 and better results in executive functions will possibly correlate with more frequent use of strategies and greater metacognitive awareness, being proficiency in L1 and L2 the most important factor. Next slide, please. So our method, our participants, the variable bilingualism, they were supposed to do 2 tests, a Portuguese reading test of the university where I did my PhD, and also English proficiency test that is Michigan, and they were supposed to have, they were categorized as bad readers if they got 20%, 25% or less, and 75% or more as good readers. They weren't supposed to have another graduation. This is the second variable. And the third one, the reading proficiency that I mentioned before with the bilingualism. So with the scores, the next slide, please. So we have tested 247 participants, and our final sample was made of 55. So they were university students of several universities of Rio Grande do Sul, that is a state in the very south of Brazil. So they were divided in 4 mutually exclusive groups: successful readers in both languages, Portuguese and English, good readers in Portuguese but not in English, good readers in English but not in Portuguese, and bad readers in both languages. Then these are the acronyms that we have labeled them. Next slide, please. So our instruments, I mentioned about the Michigan test. We use a sample one. The Portuguese reading test was from a university. We also use a socioeconomic status questionnaire, a reading habits and bilingualism survey as well. And number 5 and number 6 are our instruments to measure metacognition in L1 reading. So I did an instrument, I will tell you soon how it was. And a self-report, a Likert scale questionnaire of metacognitive awareness of reading strategies, made by Mokhtari and Heischer, the researchers from Texas. And the 7, 8, and 9 were the executive function tests we have selected for testing executive functions of the participant. Next slide, please. So this is just the first part of my instrument. Basically, students were given an argumentative text that is divided into paragraphs. They were supposed to tell their actions and their strategies while they read. So they read a paragraph and then they have a space in which they report in a written form what were their actions and strategies. And then the next paragraph, and then so on till the text is ready. Then they have a question of thesis, the main objective of the text, the most important ideas for the thesis, analysis of an expression from the text, true and false, and a correction activity from the true and false question, a summary. This summary was analyzed using Cahel's taxonomy. This taxonomy divides the summary into 4 levels, like from the top to the bottom, considering having the thesis, the most important, the medium ones, and the no important ideas. And the last question was a reading evaluation. Next slide, please. So our results. This is our first graph. It's related to the Mokhtari and Heischer test. It's called MARCI. So we can see that number 1 and number 3, that were the bilingual groups, they have the better scores in the metacognitive awareness of reading strategy. Next slide, please. So the next graph is our second measure of metacognition in L1 reading. This is about my instrument. It was analyzed using 67 taxonomy of reading strategies made of a reunion of a lot of researchers that I mentioned there. And for statistical work, we have grouped them into 13 categories. So here we can see the main one, the most used ones, And so we can see some similar results in terms of reading strategies, with some correlations, especially to attention to reading aspects. That is the second part. Next slide, please. So here it's an example of our correlations. We have used Kruskal-Wallis test for independent samples. So these are correlations between Marcy and strategies and proficiency and L1 and L2 and executive function. Next slide, please. So our research, basically, we see that there was a correlation between Marcy and categories of strategies. And with reading proficiency in L1, it happened in two categories, this correlation, and in L2 in one category. And also there were correlations between categories of strategies and EFS. Considering it was 13, it was not a lot. And we could see also that there was correlation between executive functions, also with some strategies. In digital span forward in 2 strategies and digital span backwards in 3, the total 2, and word span in 2. Next slide, please. We could see, however, we could see that there was no correlation between Marcy and EF. The reading proficiency constructs in L1 and L2 show more impact than executive functions in metacognition in L1 reading. We could see also that there was significance of the high level group in terms of the low group. So our bilingual group have much better results than our monolingual one in strategy use, and also in executive functions, but especially in executive function. And the bilingual group just in English and the monolingual in Portuguese, there was no correlation, and no correlation with the monolingual one with anyone else. Sorry. Next slide, please. We could see that the strategies that were used were kind of the same, but that we can see that maybe there is the existence of general reading procedures independent of reading proficiency. But other possibility of interpretation is that less efficient readers, they use the same strategies, but in a less effective way, because in fact they use less strategies than the bilingual group. Next slide. So these are my references. And thank you so much for the attention, and I'm open to any questions or comments.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Over to Katie. Thank you.
So just to follow on, thank you everybody for joining Linguistics Athens 2026. It's been memorable for the people who went to Athens. I hope you had a good time and have enjoyed the good weather. Although when I left it was raining, so maybe not. So I want to thank you on behalf of the society, the International Linguistics Society, the organising committee, Antonis Botinis, the man behind the curtain, who's unfortunately not able to attend at this moment in time. I'd also like to just remind you of our upcoming conferences. If anybody's interested, we're going back to Hong Kong for phonetics. We have an interesting online session for language education. We also have language disorders coming up. We have a great partnership with a company called DLAD. Hopefully this should be quite good. And again, we're back in Paris. So if we see you in the future, some of the faces I recognise as your popular and regular linguists. But that's it. So thanks for joining Athens 2026. And that's it from us. So goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
For everything. Thank you for the